Have you ever worked in an environment where trust is low, communication is strained, and simply showing up each day feels exhausting? Unfortunately, toxic workplace cultures are becoming increasingly common, not only in the business, but sometimes even in our churches, ministries, and nonprofit organizations. The impact can be devastating, affecting morale, productivity, relationships, and even our spiritual well being. Today's guest believes there is a better way. Welcome to another episode of the Unconventional Ministry Podcast, where we explore innovative ideas, creative approaches, and unexpected ways God is at work through people and organizations around the world. My guest today is Doug Shaw, the founder and CEO of Douglas Shaw and Associates, and the author of Curative Culture that we're going to talk about today. Doug helps leaders create healthy, thriving workplace environments where people are valued, respected, and empowered to flourish. His work is grounded in biblical principle that every person is created in the image of God. His work challenges organizations to move beyond merely avoiding toxic work environments to actually cultivating cultures that bring healing, trust, and purpose. So, Doug, welcome to the Unconventional Ministry Podcast.
Thanks, Dennis. It's good to be with you.
We met at National Religious Broadcasters, and I was up at your suite there. You did a little talk about curative culture and this book that you've written. So let's jump right in. And what motivated you to write this book, Curative Cultures, and why is that so important today?
Well, I think what a high motivation was, I'd had my tail feathers singed many times by working in toxic environments. So that I got to a place where I realized when I finally felt like the Lord was leading me to form my own company, that I needed to be thoughtful that I didn't recreate what I'd been in. That was a significant motivation for me. I think that the environments that I had experienced, which I do write about in the book Curative Culture, were largely Christian organizations. And that's not something people necessarily want to hear, but that is the reality of the situation. And when I was in them, I felt like, I don't think this is what we're being called to be. And so that was a huge motivator for me to think through what did I want to create, and then what were the principles involved in creating a culture that I felt was really going to give health and wholeness and freedom to people in faith.
So you've coined the phrase curative cultures.
Yes.
For our podcast listeners, define it in a sentence or two, because we're going to talk a lot about curative cultures, what to look for and how to avoid them and how to get into it. And so how would you describe it for our podcast listeners?
Well, the word curative comes from the Latin curare, which means to heal and nourish. And basically, and I don't mean by that that we should become doctors or therapists. A curative culture is really a culture where people feel the safety to be themselves, but also have a sense of purpose and hope in their employment. And that's really what a curative culture is about. It's giving people hope.
So let's talk to our podcast listeners who are working in jobs, sometimes, hourly jobs or maybe in management. What are some signs that the culture is going toxic?
It's an interesting question because I think a lot of it comes down to reading the room. When people get together, for example, when I have staff meetings twice a year at my company where we're all in person, often we have many more meetings that are virtual, but we all get together in person. I can't hardly begin to get the room quiet to begin a meeting. People are enjoying each other so much, and they're talking and laughing and just catching up with each other. And to me, reading the room is so critical. And when you get on, even in a virtual meeting, what's going on before you really start a meeting? There's a lot of telltale signs there that help you to understand, do people like each other? Do they feel safe? Are they expressing themselves? And what are they talking about? Are they talking about, they don't listen to me? Or are they really talking about, I came across this idea that could help us have greater impact? What are people talking about? Those are really critical things in a culture. And I think that's a real helpful signal.
A similar question then comes to mind. Are there behaviors that leaders tend to have that show a toxic work environment or would lead to a toxic work environment?
Definitely. I think and you use the word leader, and I think leaders are responsible for the culture in their organization. We all contribute, but leaders set the tone, and the behaviors of leaders really set the tone. You can articulate a set of beliefs, but not live them out, and people are going to follow what you're living out, not what you're articulating. And I think a lot of times leaders will say, "Hey, we're going to say this is who we are," but that's really just something hanging on the wall. It's not really how we behave. I think it's really critical that not only do we develop our value system, but that we embody and embrace it. And if we do, people are going to emulate what they see. And we are going to feel like we are being true to our belief system if we live out our values. So behavior that does not embrace its own values and is inconsistent with who we say we are is very detrimental.
And that would apply to business. Of course, we're talking about businesses and workplaces, but also in the church.
Absolutely.
Churches can have toxic environments.
Yes.
Nonprofit ministries or nonprofits or international ministry can have these toxic work environments for staff as well, right?
Anyone can. In fact, I don't know why we as people of faith sometimes think, well, because we're in Christian ministry, we are not subject to the laws of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Because we really are. If we're not honest, if we are not consistent, if we don't live out the things that we truly believe, people are going to see through us. And to me, I don't want to bring shame on my faith. I don't want to bring shame on my God. I want to be one who lives according to what I espouse. Now, I am not in any way claiming perfection when I say that. I need grace and mercy and forgiveness as much as anyone. But I do think that if we're going to, particularly in Christian ministry, if we're going to espouse that we have a faith motivation for what we're doing, publicly espouse that, I think the need for us to live according to values that are truly biblically based, to live according to them and not just espouse them is so critical because it reflects on the church.
Right. You
Reflects
talk
on
about the Imago Dei in your book, the fact that we're image bearers of God, and as we think in terms of leaders being image bearers in their leadership, talk to us how that Imago Dei concept from the Bible impacts leadership.
well, as I was formulating what I understood really about a biblical model for leadership, I went to Genesis and I was reading, and on the sixth day it says that the Lord created man and woman in his own image. And I started thinking about that. Now, what is the significance of that statement? We are created in our Creator's image. Now, we're created beings, we are not creators, but in his image. So if indeed he thought enough of us to create us in his own image, how should we treat each other? And as leaders, how should we treat those who work in our work community? Do we look at them as being image bearers, as you say? Or do we see them as a means to an end? And if we look at them as image bearers, then we have to ask ourselves the questions: how do I treat people? Even those people that I don't like. And we all have people we don't like, whether we want to admit it or not. So that begs that question.
Yeah. So as we think about that, what are some steps? I know we got some leaders that listen to the podcast, our subscribers. And if you're enjoying this conversation, I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast. But for our leaders, what are some first steps they could take to create, not that they have toxic environment, but to create a more curative culture in their church, their organization, their ministry?
Well, I think I know when I take a look at companies, and I spend quite a bit of energy during my writing and look at mission, vision, and values of companies. And I look at mission and vision, and I realize mission and vision tell you what a company does. Values answer a different question. It says, how does it feel to work in your company? Mission and vision say, what does your company do? So as I look at values, and quite honestly, very few companies list their values. And those that do, they're often show you what you owe the company as opposed to who the company wants to be. So I would say one of the things that we can do is be thoughtful, very thoughtful in creating our values. And it took my company about Douglas Shaw and Associates. It took us about, I think, about 5 years into the life of our company, which is now over 30 years old, before we sat down as a leadership team and said, okay, let's get it straight. Let's say this is who we really want to be. And we did our mission and vision, yes, but we also, what really took the most time was articulating our values in a thoughtful manner. And I have to say, that was the most contentious part of our meeting. We took a 2-day retreat, and we were working through the process of here's who we say we want to be. And as we took our time and we went through it, we laid out how we wanted to be looked at, how we wanted to be judged, and how we wanted to be measured, and then how we wanted to live. And they all had to be in sync. And so we put together our value statement. And to this day, almost year 31 now, we have not changed it. Now, we do look at it and say, does it need changing? And quite frankly, we have not found a need to yet. But this is what we use as guardrails to make our critical decisions, including hiring, including corrective action, including what clients we believe we're supposed to serve. How do we resolve conflicts? Those things are all guided by these values.
So the organizations you work with, you would implement the same strategy that you've done for yourself. You replicate that with the organizations you're working with. Is that right?
Well, I can tell you, I do not consider myself a management consultant. I am really a fundraising consultant. But you cannot raise money in a company that is highly dysfunctional. So often when we're working with CEOs and others in, I guess, what they call the C-suite, we're helping them to realize this is a positive culture that we can work in. How are you operating right now? In fact, we'll often find that there are problematic areas in an organization that need to be changed before we can successfully raise money. So when we sit down with leaders, we are talking to them about their values and about their leadership team and whether or not their team is following their values. The biggest issue is they have not been thoughtful in articulating them before they decide to embrace. So many of them are just on the wall or on a 3x or on a small card they carry in their wallet. They're not really things that they truly live by.
So in 31 years, you've helped hundreds of organizations, maybe over 1,000 now. I don't know your total numbers, but you have some great stories of companies, ministries that have moved away from toxicity into a curative culture. Can you share some of those success stories with our podcast listeners?
Well, I think that when I think about organizations that I've served that have been in toxic situations, for example, I worked for an organization. I'm not going to name them, of course, but I worked for an organization that had a person who was interfacing with our company to raise money. And I knew we were in trouble the day she said, I'm keeping a list on you guys. And I said, really, a list? I said, yes, I'm keeping a list on you guys. And every mistake you make, I'm writing it down. I just want you to know that. And I knew the leadership of the organization very well. They trusted me. They helped me to even have a business. They were my very first client. And I went back to the leadership and I said, I think we may have a problem brewing here. They said, how so? I said, well, we've got a person on your team that's keeping a list of every mistake we made. And they got mad at me. The vice president said, Doug Shaw, how come you let this go on so long without telling me? I said, well, first of all, I didn't want to be disrespectful. When somebody tells me something, I want to listen to it. But I started to realize there was no good end to this. That when someone starts becoming a scorekeeper on mistakes, then I know we have trouble. What we really need to do when we have mistakes is articulate them and then give my company the opportunity to own them. And I think that's a big thing that we can do for each other, is to own our mistakes. And quite frankly, that's something we try to teach our clients as well as our company, is when they make a mistake, hopefully they'll own it. When we make a mistake, we don't want to sit here and tell you 10 reasons why it wasn't our fault. So that's something that we spend a lot of time with in our relationships with clients and organizations we've served over the years, is what is reality? And do I embrace reality? And if reality is I've made a mistake, I'm going to make it right. I think that's a real critical part of what's made us trustworthy for people in the marketplace, is that we're going to make our mistakes as right as we can.
So I encourage you to purchase the book, Curative Culture. It's on all the different platforms, Amazon and all the rest of them. It's on douglasshaw.com. And you can learn more about the ministry and the fundraising that they do for so many great organizations and businesses. Your clientele is mostly ministry focused, or a lot of businesses helped as well, probably?
Well, our primary base are Christian nonprofits. We also do some work for folks like Ronald McDonald House and Children's Cancer Research. So, but they have to have values that match our faith values. They can't be going against our values. But I will say that the vast majority are organizations that are faith-based.
So check out douglasshaw.com. And Doug is also on LinkedIn, as well as some other platforms. So check it out. And I appreciate you coming on the Unconventional Ministry Podcast to broaden our perspective on this whole issue of creating culture. And it's surprising how many toxic workplace environments there are. And you're really bringing a valuable resource to move away from that into curative culture. Give a definition again so our podcast listeners can take it home with them.
Sure. A curative culture, again, really is based on the fact that we are all created in the image of God. And as a result of that, it is based on a set of values that we articulate based on what we really believe. If we really believe our values and we embody them, we can have a curative culture.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
I appreciate each of you joining us on the Unconventional Ministry Podcast. If you found this podcast episode helpful, share it with your workplace environment, your leadership, your president of your business, your pastor, your nonprofit organization, and share it with your friends and colleagues. Together, let's continue exploring creative and unconventional ways God is working, and He works through curative cultures as well. And until next time, I'm Dennis Wiens. Stay bold, stay creative, and keep advancing the gospel in unconventional ways. Thank you, Doug, for joining us.
Thank you.